Yep, it's another one of those days. I've been slowly trying to get rid of these extra pieces of A5 Wagyu that I have in my freezer from the massive rib roast that I bought last year. I'll link below the other videos showing the other ways that I prepared it so far. But today I wanted to try this common way that I've seen people prepare chunks of Wagyu, and that is making a Wagyu Katsu Sando. The concept is simple. You just bread and flash fry a chunk of Wagyu, and then you stick it on a sandwich with some Japanese milk bread and some Katsu sauce. This version's not going to be the best you'll ever see, but I did try to make almost everything from scratch, and it was my first time doing this, and at this point I'm just trying to get rid of the rest of my Wagyu steak because it's already a year old. So if you want to see what I did, let's get into it. The first thing I started with was this Japanese milk bread. I had never made it before, and like I always say when I make bread, I'm not super experienced with it and I'm just learning. That being said, this is kind of like a brioche bread, which I have done before, namely in my king cake video, which came out absolutely amazing. But what this starts with is a Tangzhong method, in which we prehydrate and pre-cook a little bit of the flour, which for science reasons is going to make our dough stay moister and fresher for longer and just last longer in general. So I'm putting a quarter cup or 60 mils of each whole milk and water, as well as a quarter cup or 30 grams of bread flour into a saucepan over medium heat, and just whisk that together until it dissolves. And then once everything starts to clump and pull away from the sides, then you know you're done. It only takes like 2 to 3 minutes. You can set that aside to cool, and we're going to get the rest of our stuff ready. I have a half a cup or 120 mils of whole milk that I've heated to between 90 and 100 degrees Fahrenheit, to which I'm going to add a whole packet or 7 grams of active dry yeast, and I'm also stealing a tiny bit of the 50 grams or quarter cup of white sugar that I've already measured to help the yeast feed on something. Just stir that together and give it a few minutes to become a
frothy boy.
Now into the bowl of my stand mixer, I'm going to add 340 grams or just under 3 cups, so maybe you can start with like 2.5 cups of bread flour. I'm also adding in the rest of that 50 grams of sugar, as well as 6 grams or 1 teaspoon of kosher salt, and then I'm adding an optional 8 grams or 2 teaspoons of diastatic malt powder. In my experience, it's always enhanced the texture of any bread that I've made. I don't completely understand the science behind it, but from everybody that I've heard from, they have the same experience, so I've always just added it and it's never steered me wrong. Then I just lightly stir that for a few seconds with my dough hook attachment to get everything incorporated, before adding in my yeast mixture as well as the Tangzhong and mixing again. After about a minute on medium speed, I'm cracking in 1 large egg, and then I'm letting that knead again for another minute or so, before finally adding in 4 tablespoons or 60 grams of softened unsalted butter. The fat in this butter is what's going to help our dough be nice and soft and wonderfully rich. I just gradually added in 1 tablespoon at a time until everything kind of gets mixed in, and then I'm just going to knead everything on medium-high speed for like 8 to 10 minutes, or until the dough forms one cohesive ball that pulls away from the sides and doesn't stick to your hands too much when you touch it, and you can pull it quite a bit before it tears. That tells you that the strands of gluten are ready. You might need to adjust flour because of the climate that you live in or other factors, so if it's too sticky you can always add a little bit more flour and knead a bit more. But we're going to dump this into a large oiled bowl and cover it and let it rise for like 1 to 2 hours. Once it's risen, we're going to punch it down, and then I'm going to use a kitchen scale to measure it out so that I can cut it into 2 equal pieces. I've seen recipes that do 3 pieces or even like 5 to 6 pieces, but I was just feeling a little lazy here. And I would emphasize trying to be as exact as possible here because I was only like 5 to 10 grams off between my 2 pieces, and you'll see how lopsided it was. But either way, we're going to take each piece on a lightly floured work surface and then kind of just work it out. You can use your hands or rolling pin into a rectangle. I tried to make it roughly the length and width of my loaf pan here, which is 5 by 9 inches. And then I'm just going to carefully roll up each piece long ways until I have this sort of cylinder shape. Again, I'm no expert, so I don't think I did it perfectly here, but you can find other tutorials that probably give you more information. This is just kind of what I found during my research. I'm just going to nestle each piece next to each other in the loaf pan and try to put them as evenly spaced as possible because they're going to rise into each other. Which, speaking of, I'm going to wrap this tightly in plastic wrap and then let it rise one more time for like an hour or so. You should start to see the dough rise out and over the top and kind of muffin out over the sides, which is going to give us that classic loaf shape once we cut into it. And towards the end of this final proof, I'm going to preheat my oven to 350F or 180C. And then as one final step, I'm going to gently brush over some more whole milk over the top of this loaf, which is going to help it brown. I've seen people say you can do egg wash as well. I honestly don't know what the difference would be, but I can tell you that the whole milk worked fine. And that's it. We're just going to pop this into the oven for 30 to 40 minutes or until the top is nicely golden brown. If you want to be super sure, you can use a thermometer and check the temperature inside to see that it's fully cooked, and you should be above 190 Fahrenheit. But yes, this final step is also very important. We're going to let it cool in the pan for like 10 to 15 minutes on top of a rack, and then we can remove it from the pan and then put it directly on top of the rack to let it cool completely. You never want to cut into bread that is not fully cooled because the crumbs are not set and you're going to have this kind of gooey inside that you don't want. So just to be super safe, I would wait like 1 to 2 hours before you even think of cutting into this. You don't want to ruin your hard work. But while that's cooling, we can start to get together the rest of our components, and I'm going to start with my katsu sauce. As usual, I don't really measure the sauces that I make, I just kind of go by feel and then taste as I go, but I'm just going to put some estimates in the description below. This sauce is traditionally based with Japanese sake, which is some form of liquor. I'm not the guy to ask about that, and in the Asian market I saw tons of different ranges of prices for this, so I don't know the difference in quality, but I just kind of went with one of the cheaper options. I'm adding some of that to a non-stick pan, as well as a little bit of black pepper, onion powder, and garlic powder, and then I'm just going to kind of mix that together to start to dissolve it. I'm also going to heat it on medium heat to start to cook off the alcohol, as well as toast up the spices a bit. After a few minutes it'll start to simmer like this, and I'm going to cut the heat down a bit and add some Worcestershire sauce, as well as some ketchup and some honey, and then some Dijon mustard and a little bit of oyster sauce to finish. And this is not traditional, but I like to add a little bit of gochugaru or Korean chili flakes just to give it a little extra spice. Then you can just cook that down on medium-low over the course of a few minutes, stirring constantly to try to reduce everything. Once you get it to your desired spreadable sauce consistency, you're done. This is what mine looked like. You can set that aside as well, and we're going to start to prep our steak. Traditionally, you would cut a square shape out of this to fit it better on the bread, but I don't have any squares left of this. I just have these strips, so this is what I'm working with. I took mine out like 30 to 45 minutes beforehand just to let it sit at room temperature and come to temperature. It's not very thick, so I didn't need more time than that. And then I set up a standard 3-stage breading station, starting with some white flour, which I'm not going to season because I'm going to season the steak directly because I can more precisely do it that way. Next, I just crack and beat one egg thoroughly just to separate the proteins so it's not just one big glob. And finally, I just have a dish of panko breadcrumbs, which is going to give us that signature crunch on the outside. I'm also getting a couple of inches of peanut oil heating over high heat. I'm going to use a thermometer to pinpoint it to around 380 degrees Fahrenheit when I fry, because we want to flash fry this steak. We don't want to overcook the middle. Also, I do want to have my bread ready to go at this point because I want my steak to be the last thing that finishes. So once it's cooled, I'm going to slice a couple of thick slices of my milk bread, and then I'm going to generously coat one side of each in some softened butter, and I'm going to toast them in a non-stick skillet over medium heat until I get a nice even browning on them. This is going to harden up one side of our bread and allow it to hold the sauce better without sogging up. Okay, now for the steak, I'm going to coat all sides of it with some salt and pepper. This is the only seasoning the steak is going to get, so you can be generous here. Then we're going to go through each stage of our breading station, starting with the flour, making sure we pack it in and coat every surface of the steak. Shake off the excess and then into the egg, or you're going to toss it around until again all the surfaces are well coated. Shake off the excess, and then one more time we're going to dunk it into our panko, making sure we press those crumbs into the steak. Try to fit as many as you can on there, flipping it around a good bit just to make sure you get a nice even surface. Once the oil's at temp, you can drop it right in, and this is going to be a really quick process because we want to keep that inside nice and medium rare. After just 30 seconds, I'm going to flip it over just to make sure both sides are cooked evenly, and after a minute total, you're going to pull it out onto a wire rack. I would say you can go even a little less than that because once you see the inside of mine, you might think it's a little overcooked. But that could also be because my steak is so old at this point, it's lost some of its pink color. Regardless, just give that about 5 minutes to set, and then we can start to get ready to plate up. I'm going to generously and evenly spread my katsu sauce over the toasted side of my bread, and then I'll gently lay my Wagyu over the middle. Remember, if you can, try to make this a square shape, not like a rectangle like mine. This is just all I had. Then we're going to put on our top piece of bread and start to trim away at the crust and any excess edge of bread, which in my case I had a lot. So that's our sandwich, but generally it's served with a few cuts in it so you can see the cross section on the inside. I think I usually see it cut into 3 pieces, but again, with mine being so small, I'm only cutting it into 2. So this is our moment of truth, and yeah, you can still see a little pink on the inside. It's not as pretty as probably what you'd see on the internet, but again, I'm going to attribute some of that to this having sat in my freezer for over a year. Regardless, you can kind of stack it up like this. Mine's a little lopsided, but that's okay, and then you just serve it. Well, here we are again. This time, a lot of work and money just to give us 2 tiny little sandwiches, but the point is in the principle. This is something to treat yourself and take the time to make it so you can enjoy it. By the way, this milk bread on its own is amazing, and it's super cheap and easy to make. So even without spending all the money on the meat, you can do this for a special occasion. But yeah, to celebrate this steak's first birthday in a way, I just think this was another cool thing to do with it besides just searing it and eating it. You may have already seen my Wagyu rice squares video a couple months ago, and the point is just trying to use up what I still have left from the big rib roast in different ways. But I'm gonna get my palette ready with one of these well done end pieces that I cut off, which even though it's cooked through, this is still very juicy already on the outside. Even after a year of sitting in the freezer, you can tell that it's lost a bit of its quality, but that's still one of the best bites of steak you're ever gonna have. Okay, now let's try this Sando. goodness. A chunk of whole meat, you know, unground meat should not just melt away like that. You shouldn't just be able to bite through it with something this thick. Yet again, one of the best things I've ever eaten. That is so much more than a meal or even a snack. It's really just the experience. And it's food experiences like this where you remember the exact day, you remember the meal that you prepped, because it's so unique and so special that to me makes it all worth it. This year has been a little rough mentally, and you could think it's silly to say, but sometimes special foods or special meals that you make or just buy from somewhere can really lift you up, and this is one of those. To string that out a bit more, just having this small channel and this ability to put something out there even though it doesn't get too far is something I feel really blessed to do, and I'm very happy to have this opportunity. Something like this really isn't the foundation that I base my videos on. I do more regular things, but every once in a while I want to do something different. I still have 2 little slabs of Wagyu left in my freezer, so if you have any more ideas for me to use those, I need to do that quickly because they're old. But with that said, I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you got something out of it. If anything, just doing this milk bread, you don't even have to use my recipe, just getting the idea to do it. Get a loaf pan and do it yourself. And that's it. Thank y'all for watching, and I'll see you next time. It's a good day.